Good morning, everyone. It's a real privilege to be here to speak to you this morning. I'm really grateful for the invite to come and speak to you a little bit about our experience in Scotland, particularly as we start on our journey to transform primary care. I should say a little bit about myself because I don't think that you have an equivalent role within Denmark. So, my name's Gregor Smith. I am a GP and I am Deputy Chief Medical Officer for Scotland. The Chief Medical Officer and the Deputy Chief Medical Officer in Scotland provide independent clinical advice to our Scottish ministers in matters relating to health. We act as the kind of leadership figureheads for our profession in Scotland, and we're a conduit for that discussion that takes place between the medical profession and our ministers. One of the things that marks out the Scottish Government, in my opinion, is its reliance on professionalism as a mechanism for developing policy. This is really, really important. I think probably more so than any other of the UK nations. Is that better? More so than any of the other UK nations, what we have is a group of ministers who are really keen to ensure that policy is grounded in the reality of everyday service. So I'm going to say a little bit about myself. This is the general practice in which I used to work. I qualified from Glasgow University in 1994. I started in this practice in 1998. It's in a small town called Larkhall. We had a population of about 10,500 patients, between 5 GPs, and we worked damn hard, really hard. On a typical Monday, I would maybe see 60 patients of various levels of acuity. It was busy. It was busy. But we were also a practice who prided ourselves on trying to be at the forefront of development. We were the first practice in Scotland to have a completely paperless patient record, all electronic based. That was about 1999 we introduced that. And we tried to be innovative in terms of our model of care as well. So we had a physiotherapist and a psychologist who worked with us as part of the practice team as well. That was of enormous benefit to us as clinicians. It was of enormous benefit to our patients as well. Any of you seen this picture before? I love this picture. So we all need heroes in our life. And one of my great heroes is Don Berwick, who is the American paediatrician some of you may know. Don tells this story far better than I do, but I think this is a great parable for modern medicine. This is the Choluteca Bridge in the Honduras. And it was one of those infrastructure pieces which the Honduras built in the 1990s to replace a rather older, rickety bridge, which was the main crossing of this river. And then Hurricane Mitch came along. And Hurricane Mitch dumped so much water on the land around about that it washed away all the surrounding infrastructure. But the bridge remained untouched. And I think the message in here for me is, I wonder if we're doing the same with modern medicine. We spend so much on our beautiful new shiny cathedrals of care in the hospitals. We reach ever so further all the time about the way we try to deliver higher technology care. And sometimes we forget about the basics. And the risk is that those basics may end up being washed away if we don't invest in them in the same way. And I think investment in primary care, strengthening primary care, nurturing primary care is one way that we can actually take forward modern medicine and it's face some of the demands which we all know lie in front of us. So I want to give this some context. As I said, I'm a GP by background. In 2006, I took my first steps into medical management. In 2008, I was appointed as a medical director for one of our regional health boards for primary care. So that was looking after a population of probably about 500,000 patients, just over. And then in 2012, I was invited to become a senior medical officer in Scottish Government. What an opportunity. The chance to finally influence policy at this level. Within 2 weeks, I was placed into a situation which was as exciting as I could ever hope to have experienced. Now, the GP contract in the United Kingdom was traditionally negotiated at a 4-nation level in London. But those talks had broken down. And it looked as though we were heading for a situation where the UK government, the English government, was going to impose the settlement on their GPs. That wasn't the Scottish way. Our minister asked us to engage with BMA Scotland, if you like, the Doctors' Union in Scotland, to see whether there was any way that we could negotiate a separate Scottish agreement at that point in time. So within 2 weeks of starting this role, we started these negotiations. Within 6 weeks, we had an agreement. And we sat together at a table just before Christmas and signed an agreement which was actually the start of our journey to developing a wholly Scottish contract for our GPs. It was a wonderful experience, and it's an experience that I think was only possible because of the relationships and the trust that we were able to develop at that local level. So that's the context. NHS Scotland, we've got a population of about 5.4 million. We have a devolved parliament, so our parliament in Scotland is completely, entirely responsible for the provision of health to our population. And as you know, we have universal health care, free at the point of care. That includes free prescriptions to all our patients as well. Our budget for the NHS in Scotland is 12.4 billion. That works out roughly about $3,300 per patient or per head of population, which I think is lower than you currently spend in Denmark. And to deliver that, we have 14 territorial health boards and 8 special boards. The territorial boards you'll see kind of represented on this map. We also have 32 local government bodies within Scotland, and this is important because I'll speak to you about some of the transformative change that we have in terms of local government as well. And I was struck by my previous colleagues' slides. So much similarity in the challenges that we face. So in Scotland, this is our slide for the projected percentage change in Scotland's population by age group up to 2035. And as you can see, just like Denmark, we're seeing this demographic time bomb, which is already exploding around about us. It's not just about an older population, though. If you look at this, you'll also see that some of our younger working population is projected to reduce as well at the same time as we have this. This is really important. These are the people that are responsible for economic growth. These are the people that are responsible for providing some sort of care for this older population that we have as well. And this is a wonderful study from the Scottish School of Primary Care and my friend Stuart Mercer, published in 2012, which shows multimorbidity in Scotland. Now you can see with that older population why care feels as though it's becoming more complex. The other important thing, which is sometimes not spoken about this study, is that in our most deprived communities in Scotland, multimorbidity occurs roughly 10 years younger than in our most affluent communities. That puts incredible strain on local health services. And amongst those multimorbidities, there's a far greater incidence of mental health disorders as well. The upshot of that is that there are actually more people in Scotland under the age of 65 with multimorbidity than over the age of 65. And all this during a time of austerity. So this is public finance funding from 29 through to 2025. And you can see the effect of public spending in Scotland through this age of austerity, and that cumulatively we've lost £39 billion sterling of spend and support across the health system. Health has been relatively protected, I have to say, but our annual spend still probably falls behind what our health inflation is. So the world is changing, and we need to adapt the way that we provide care in order that we can meet these challenges. The National Clinical Strategy for Scotland was published earlier this year, and essentially at its heart, what it says is that we need to start doing things differently. It has 4 pieces within it. One is about the way that we should change acute care, which is about ensuring that when we provide care that it's appropriate, that we're addressing harmful and wasteful variation that we know exists within the system. The second part is about transforming primary care, strengthening primary care in order that we can meet the demands that face us. The other two parts are very interesting as well. Third part is about an infrastructure piece, which is about making sure that we have both the leadership support, the IT and e-health infrastructure, and the educational infrastructure to support these change. But this has been my baby over the last year. Realistic medicine. This is the annual Chief Medical Officer's report within Scotland. In February we published this, and we decided to take a break with tradition. Rather than publish the national statistics, what we wanted to do was to publish a document that started a conversation with the profession about the way that we delivered care. And these are the 6 questions that we asked the profession. It's been a fascinating 6 months since we published this document, and I have to say that it's probably exceeded our expectations in terms of the interest that it has generated with the profession. And what it's given us now is a work plan to take forward that will, I think, redefine medical professionalism for doctors in Scotland for the modern era of medicine. Can't do all of this without political support. That's where part of my role comes in, because I need to be able to work with my policy official colleagues in convincing ministers that this is the right thing to do. And Shona Robison, our health minister, stood up in Parliament in December 2015 and described this vision for primary care within Scotland. I think there's elements of this that you'll recognise from your own work in Denmark. But essentially, she said primary and community care had to be at the heart of the healthcare system. It had to be run in a way where the multidisciplinary team was there to provide care. And one of the structural changes that we would seek to make was to develop what we call locality clusters, and I'll say more about that as the presentation goes on. But importantly, that our professionals, our clinicians, should also be involved in the strategic planning of services at a local level. This is, again, really, really important. Local clinicians being involved and trying to shape services according to that local population's needs. Scotland's not a homogenous society where the needs of the population are the same in every town or region throughout. So it's right that these local discussions take place in order to shape things. And this is our timescales, our 3 curves to the new world. We recognise that this change isn't going to take place overnight. We are about to enter this transition phase just now. We're already starting to see some of the beginnings of that as we test new models of care up and down the countries. We've got 84 pilots for new models of care currently running up and down the country. We've evolved the GP contract to an extent where by 2017 we will have a totally new contract for GPs in Scotland that bears no relation to what we had before. So I want to say a little bit about the structural changes, the model of care, our approach to quality, and then sum up with a little bit about our GP contract. Now, I mentioned health and social care integration. Those 32 local government bodies, since the 1st of April, have now formed into integrated joint boards with our 14 local health boards. These are the functions that these integrated joint boards will become responsible for. Importantly, they will also be responsible for, you see this proportion of care here which is done or delivered through hospitals. So this isn't just about reshaping the way that we provide care within communities, but actually influencing the way that care is provided within our hospitals as well. And these integrated joint boards across Scotland will be responsible for the spend of around about 2/3 of the budget, that 12.4 billion budget that I mentioned before. This is transformational change on a structural level that I don't think we've ever attempted before in Scotland. On the 1st of April, these bodies came into being. They are still shaping themselves, but already we're starting to see some of the benefits, particularly in addressing some of the challenges around about delayed discharges from hospitals. And we know that that's going to be an absolute critical part of the way that we try to meet this demographic challenge. This is a structural representation. Our macro system, as I say, the integrated joint board. These are usually delivered down into operational units that we call localities. And then we have a microsystem, the actual delivery end of it, which are GP clusters and their linked community staff. So that's your community health teams, such as your district nurses, your mental health teams, your health visitors, your social care groups, and actually now a range of workers which come from a wide variety of different professions. I want to concentrate on GP clusters. I came across this slide, actually. It was a presentation around about an IT firm. And as soon as I saw this presentation, it just really struck a chord for me. This is GP clusters. We've been so stuck in an age of medicine, which was mechanistic, hierarchical, bureaucratic. We needed to change. We needed to destabilise the system in some way. We needed to use the power of networks in order that we kind of tried to kind of deliver our care. And it just struck me that this was one way of really attempting that. So we started to try to describe what the role of the GP cluster might be. First and foremost is a learning network looking at local solutions to local problems. So groups of GP practices banding together, probably covering a population of up to about 20 to 25,000 patients, working together on education, on learning, on quality improvement, on supporting each other at this initial stage. But was there perhaps the possibility that in some time in the future, these groups of practices might have some sort of operational cooperation as well, so that they were actually delivering services on behalf of each other as well? To me, that's the goal that we have to work towards. But not only that intrinsic function of what the GP cluster does for itself, but actually how it then starts to influence the wider healthcare system behind it. So how they collaborate with the IJB board teams, how they ensure quality within the wider healthcare system and contribute to that, and how they ensure that relentless focus on addressing the health inequalities that we know still exists within our system in Scotland. The model of care starts to develop from that. We want to gradually evolve the role of the GP, and we've used this term, an expert medical generalist. In my view, over the last few years, the medical profession has allowed itself to become too specialised. We've lost the appreciation of what the generalist can contribute to care. I think the generalist is an incredibly important role within medicine, and we need to strengthen that. But we need to strengthen it alongside the multidisciplinary team, because it's there that the great power comes. We've described the future role of GPs as thus. So we still know that GPs are really important in terms of the way that they manage undifferentiated presentations of illness, the way that we risk manage that, but we need them to operate at the highest level. Likewise with complex care. It's what we're good at. It's what I was trained for. If you don't use me in that way, then you waste my skills. But more importantly, we need GPs to be much more involved in terms of quality and leadership. And this is the new dimension we've started to describe, how GPs will work together and work with the wider system around about the quality agenda. Over the last 5 years in Scotland, we've invested a lot of money in trying to increase the capacity and capability and understanding of the model for improvement and continuous quality improvement. And what we hope to do now is to capitalise on that, and through the use of data, which I'll come on to, is have GPs focused relentlessly, as I say, on improving the quality of the local system. And this is a good example of one which has organically grown itself. This is Silver City in Aberdeen. Small practice, it's only about 6,000 patients, but they're in quite a deprived area, and they've got a high incidence of elderly people within it. They saw that they had a problem, but they recognised it was a shared problem with their care of the elderly units in the local hospitals. So they developed these multidisciplinary team meetings. This is great. This is growing by itself. And these teams get together, community nurses, mental health teams, care of the elderly physicians, GPs, and really importantly, link workers, people who know how to properly talk to patients about their goals. So what they have is conversations now with patients about what matters to them. And often it's things that surprise you. It's not about the high-tech end of medicine. It's about being able to take your dog a walk, or being able to take your grandchildren out in the pram. These are the goals which people were seeking. And so this multidisciplinary team is now able to get together to see how they can help patients achieve these goals by themselves. The next slide I'm going to tell you, before I go into this next slide, I'm going to tell you a little story about it. The emphasis here is on blurring the boundaries between clinical teams, blurring the boundaries between hospital care and primary care, making sure that interface is safe. Another example of this is hospital at home, which are teams particularly of care of the elderly physicians, where we're now seeing working much more closely with colleagues in the community. So I have a colleague in Lanarkshire, Graham Ellis, wonderful chap, went to university with him, and he was one of the first people to start this hospital at home. And the insight that it started to give him into his patients when he was seeing them in their own homes, just as we've enjoyed as GPs for decades, was fascinating. So this was a patient who kept on coming up with shortness of breath and his respiratory problems. And of course he kept pigeons, and he was diagnosed with pigeon fancier's lung. And every time he came to the hospital, the specialist there said, of course, you know what you need to do, you need to get rid of your pigeons. So Graham went out to see this patient one day, and as he arrived at the front door, this elderly gentleman's daughter met him and said, I need to warn you, don't talk to him about the pigeons. He gets really upset every time someone speaks to him about the pigeons. So Graham went in, this chap was in his bed, couldn't get downstairs, was too breathless, really, to get back and forward to the toilet. And he was thinking, I'm going to need to speak to him about the pigeons. And meanwhile, the daughter's nudging him, beckoning him, and she took him downstairs to show him a room. And this was the room. Turned out that this chap was the champion pigeon racer of the United Kingdom. Pigeons were his life. This is his room. This is a room dedicated to the pigeons that he has bred. These pigeons sell for between £25,000 and £30,000 each. He's got 300 of them in the sheds out the back. So when his specialist clinicians tell him to get rid of his pigeons, how do you think that's greeted? This is a point I want to make about the discussion in realistic medicine. One of the focuses that we have in Scotland just now is about making care more personalised, about understanding what's important to patients. One of the ways that we can do that is through better care and support planning. This is the house of care model. It's 4 elements. The first of those, the most important, is actually the way that we enable and empower patients to be part of that conversation. Give them the confidence, give them the tools to be able to do that. The second is the way that we approach that conversation as clinicians. Because there is a particular way. We need to lose this parental model of medicine that we've lived in for decades now. And we also need resources within the community to be able to support it as well. But at its heart, the important thing here is about the care and the support planning conversation and the quality of those discussions. So the way that we're starting to change our approach to quality in Scotland can be represented here in these 3 curves. The old paradigm was the age of new public management, which was all about scrutiny, inspection and targets. And that's tainted because that reduces morale within the system. Sometimes it even presents gaming. And the old quality and outcomes framework that we had as part of the GP contract in Scotland, I think, contributed to this as well. We've moved into the era of quality improvement where data is powerful. Data, the knowledge and intelligence about what your care actually delivers and how you improve that becomes crucial. But that involves sharing power with others. The next goal has to be about seeding power, mobilising social action, using all the assets within our community to support care. And that's the journey that we're on just now in terms of health and social care integration and how we work with community groups, how we work with communities to try to improve our approach to care. Which brings us to, now that in Scotland we have decided, unlike the rest of the United Kingdom, to do away with the quality outcomes framework, what are we going to do to measure quality within our primary care environment in the future? We held a workshop earlier on in 2016. I'm eternally grateful to one of your colleagues, Freddie Olison, to coming over to that workshop. It was a fascinating day with a range of experts from Scotland and across Europe. We explored some of the issues run about the modern approach to quality. This is a photo of that gathering. It was small, but it was a high quality. And the discussion on that day was fabulous in terms of how we started to shape our approach. And you'll see the Danish flag represented here. So we're starting, later on this, I guess in November, we'll launch a new quality framework that I've been developing called Improving Together. This is really important. Collaboration is at the heart here. One of the first things we started to set out was the principles and the values that underpin such an approach to quality, and right at its heart is the respect for professionalism, the respect that clinicians are ambitious to do well for their patients. That was one of the guiding principles in terms of our approach. We recognise that data is powerful, and we have a very good database in Scotland from primary care. We just don't use it as extensively as we might. So one of the ways that we thought was really important to try and enable that was to provide our clinicians with data analyst support in order that they go forward. So rather than continually investing in ever more clinicians, which are difficult to come by, you might have noticed, invest in support for these clinicians in ways that will be meaningful for them. Not just data analysis, but actually facilitation about the discussions that will take place within these clusters that I described. And give them improvement support as well, so that when they get that data and they talk about it, that they have the skills and the mechanisms by which they can then start to make those improvements. And more than that, give them a network that extends across Scotland, where they can not only learn in their clusters, but they can be supported and provide learning that has a bearing on a national level as well. So this is where we have taken the kind of quality framework to. It's vastly different from the tick box exercise that our GPs went through with the quality and outcomes framework. The problem for me with QOF was that it drove care in a particular way. When a patient came in to see me, I had an agenda that I wanted to discuss with them, and it often related to the missing parameters for their QOF. So that I shaped the discussion in a way which I started to treat biological measurements. What was the last blood pressure? What was the last cholesterol? What is chronic kidney disease and what does it mean for them? And instead, what we hope is that we'll go back to the conversations that actually I think are the bedrock of general practice, which is to develop those meaningful relationships with patients about what matters to them and how they interact with their roles in family and work, and how we can help them through that. Which means changes to the Scottish contract. This has currently been negotiated, so there's very little I can say about it, unfortunately. But it will be completely different from what has gone before. The BMA in Scotland have been very brave. I have to pay a huge amount of credit to my colleague Alan McDevitt, who leads the BMA. He chose, at a time that was difficult, to break away from the UK negotiations, to break away from, certainly in philosophy, from the wider BMA family within the UK, and to try to develop something which he thought that was best for his colleagues in Scotland. I think that takes enormous courage to do that, and I pay tribute to him for the way that he's done that. But this wouldn't have been possible without the collaborative relationships that we developed with the BMA. And we toured the country together. As we started to develop this, we visited every single board in Scotland. We visited each of the local medical committees as well. We shared a platform. We tried to understand what was important to the boards, what was important to GPs, what we could feed into the contractual discussions from there. And you can't help but develop relationships and trust when you do that. So the BMA negotiating team, I know their families. I know what meals they like. I know who's their favourite guitarist. We've shared music. That's the basis upon which you then start to take forward real progress. And in 2017, next year, we'll launch this GP contract. It will, as I say, differ greatly from what has gone before, but I think that it offers GPs in Scotland are a real opportunity to meet some of these challenges in a way which brings back the joy to the profession. Something which I think we've been missing for some time. And that's not to deny the challenges that exist for a profession, because there are workload challenges and there are recruitment challenges which you probably share in Denmark. But I think this offers a way of trying to face some of these challenges. So I want to introduce you to someone at the end of this. This is Ken. There are two Kens in this picture. So the man on the left-hand side with the dark suit is Sir Ken Calman, one of the former chief medical officers, not just in Scotland, but in the UK. This isn't the Ken I want to speak to you about. The Ken I want to speak to you about is on the right-hand side in the light suit. This is Ken Chisholm. Ken Chisholm was my family GP. He was also the best friend of my grandfather. I was the first person in my family to go to university. So I was the first person in my family ever to kind of take on in the medical profession. But this was my role model. This was the man who inspired me to become a GP. And I always wanted to be a GP right through university, right through my training. The only time I ever received what we call a balling from one of my training supervisors was when I told her that I wasn't applying for a prestigious medical training rotation and that I wanted to be a GP instead. And she said that I lacked ambition. Depends on how you term ambition. The point I'm trying to make here is all of you have the opportunity to be those role models. This is a message that I'm trying to get across to my profession as well. People that you will come into contact with that you've no idea the influence that you have on them will see you as examples. And through those examples that you're setting, they may choose the route into medicine and into general practice as well. And I think this is one way that we can start to fight back against the way that sometimes generalists are viewed within our medical specialties. Because if it's anything like Scotland's, you'll maybe experience in Denmark an attitude, particularly through some of our academic institutions, that looks down on general practice and denigrates it. I think it's the best specialty of all of them, of the medical professions. I think it's an important specialty. I think it's the answer to some of the challenges that we have spoken about through the course of this presentation. And if I can leave you with one last thought, it's this. I came across this handwritten note from Roald Dahl at one point, and it just really struck me as something which summed up an important approach for me. If you love it, become passionate about it, because lukewarm is no good. That's how I feel about general practice. And I hope that in the work that you take forward in Denmark, you remain passionate about general practice too. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think there's a microphone going around somewhere. And I think we needed to address it to Christian Freitag. Have anyone seen the microphone? Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I must say I'm very impressed how you managed to find common ground in a huge conflict you were facing. It's, well, breathtaking. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's on. First of all, I will say very much thank you for you to join us here in Denmark. I think it's obvious why we ask Gregor to come here and tell about what's happening in Scotland. And the purpose was that we all should have something to think about. And I think you have reached that goal in more than we could hope for, I'm sure. And I'm sure that all of us has a lot of questions concerning what you have presented here. One of the questions that I have is that if we had the Scottish healthcare minister in this room, what would she? Yeah, she. Mm-hmm. What would she tell us? Why did she go that way? What convinced her to make these rather seriously steps in another direction than we normally see from politicians if I'm allowed to say that.
It is a very good question. So Miss Robertson Shona Robertson is our minister. And I guess for a long time in Scotland, we've probably suffered the same way that other nations have, in that primary care has been a neglected area. And I think it's fair to say that we probably, in relative terms, have seen less investment, less spend in primary care, even though investment has been increasing. It's perhaps not been increasing as with as much acceleration as in other areas. So how did we convince her that primary care was the option? I think it's through the clever use of data and evidence, which is the important thing. There's a lovely old saying, but I think it was by Einstein, which if you keep on doing the same thing, you keep on getting the same answers. And keeping on doing the same thing, investing at the front door of hospitals, wasn't getting us any closer to facing some of the challenge, to addressing some of the challenges. And in the meantime, all the evidence was suggesting to us that actually investment in primary care might start to do that. So I think it's one of the things that I said that was really important in Scotland, and I want to try to bring out again, is we have a system in Scotland where we have clinical professionals embedded at all levels through Scottish Government. So not only do we have the Chief Medical Officer, myself as the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, but we have a system of senior medical officers who are attached to each of the policy areas. They are able to provide clinical advice to the policy officials about evidence base. They're able to translate the language of policy back to clinicians and vice versa. This is really, really important, because what it does is it then allows clinical evidence to be used to shape policy in a way that perhaps some other systems are not able to do. And I think it's through that use of evidence that we made the compelling case round about primary care. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
Any other questions? I think we will take another minute to, if there's something. Otherwise, I'll say thank you. And I think you proved to us how it's not only professional skills, but also personal skills that makes the whole difference. So thank you so much for joining us.